Why I Follow Jesus. Hi, my name is Becca, and here on this channel, we talk about addiction and recovery, and we have a really cool community here of people who are either struggling with that or who have gone through that. So, if that's something that resonates with you, I welcome you to join us here. So I've always wanted to talk about this. I've always wanted to share about this, and I have in bits and pieces in some of our videos here, but I wanted to take the chance to just sit down and specifically focus on it in this video. So to give you a little bit about my story, I was born into a family where my dad was Catholic and Italian, and on my mom's side, they are Cuban and Irish, and they were Seventh-day Adventists. So I was born into a situation where there was organized religion, but my parents really didn't practice it too much. And my dad's side of the family with the Catholics, they would just go to church on Christmas and Easter. But really, who introduced me to who God was and who Jesus was and what he was about was my grandmother on my mom's side. And I wouldn't consider her religious per se. I would consider her as truly a woman of faith who loved God with all of her heart. And from the time I was a young age, she really set the example and the framework of who God was. And she embodied love, and she embodied generosity and patience and kindness and meekness. And from a young age, that really made an impact on me. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but as I've gotten older and as I've reflected on it back in my life, I can see clearly how much of an impact that she made on me. So as my life went on, I had a really difficult upbringing and family situation. My parents divorced when I was young. My mom deals with addictions. She met my stepdad, who was an alcoholic. I struggled all around with my family and my family being broken because of the divorce. And I ended up leaving home when I was 16 to follow the rest of the members of the Grateful Dead and Fish and go to other like hippie music festivals around the country. And so I left home at a young age. And when I was growing up, when I was going through the family struggles that I always had a relationship with God where it was outside of any church. But as I went through these struggles and challenges in my life, I would always pray and I would always feel the presence and the comfort of God in my life. And I always felt a connection and a relationship with who I understood as God. So as my life went on and I lived this hippie life with traveling around the country and getting really into this music at the time, like the Grateful Dead's music and Fish and that kind of stuff, but the Grateful Dead mostly, it kind of became a religion to me. And in that lifestyle as well, in the hippie culture and lifestyle, there's really an interweaving of a lot of what we consider new age sort of beliefs. So there's a lot of like weird spiritual stuff that was going on through tarot, astrology, the use of psychedelics, a lot of like nature worship type stuff, a lot of weird stuff that I was, honestly intrigued by and into, because I had come from this background of being open to what thing, what spirituality and just, things that were deeper than this whole material realm. I've always been interested in that. I've always been interested in like the deeper meaning of life and that sort of thing. So as these things started crossing my path in that like hippie lifestyle that I was living, I really embraced them. And so over the years to follow, a good chunk of my life, I got further and further into this kind of stuff. And I found myself in a place where I was using a lot of psychedelics, and I was using like I was addicted to weed, and I was into all this like weird like spiritual stuff, which you can see in other videos on my channel. I won't get into it too much here, but I basically was like in this weird form of like self-worship and nature worship and like pantheism, where I thought that God was in everything, including us. So I thought that, all of us were God, and I was essentially just worshiping myself. And I got really into like a weird kind of form of nature worship where I was studying herbalism. And like I said, I was like into using a bunch of psychedelics. And I thought that God was a part of us as people, but I also thought that God was like in plants. And so I was like worshiping nature. And I found myself in this place where I started to see some of the dark side of these beliefs. And I had what's considered an illegal herbal supplement cross my path, where it really brought me into the darkest part of my life. And this legal herbal supplement is called kratom. And it crossed my path where I was in this like, time where I was worshiping plants and I was worshiping myself. And long story short, I ended up becoming helplessly addicted to this herb, and it brought me into the darkest part of my life. And I didn't know how I was going to get out of this addiction. I knew that I did not have the strength to do it on my own. And I started to slowly but surely see all of these beliefs that I had been constructing from my life in the hippie scene, and then like what led into all this new age garbage and like psychedelics and nature worship, all this kind of stuff. I had tried to draw from those beliefs to get me out of this dark place that I was in, and nothing was working, and it was making everything worse. And I got to the point where I would never do anything because I love the people in my life too much, but I basically didn't want to live anymore. And it was then that I called out to God, and not God that I thought was inside of myself or that I thought was in plants, but I called out to the God of my childhood, and the God that I had had a relationship with as a child, who I had been protected by and comforted by. And it was in that moment, the way that I called out to God was I said, show me the truth. And I consider myself a truth seeker. I consider myself one who, although I got caught up in those weird beliefs, I was ultimately seeking truth. And what I learned with those other beliefs was that what seemed like truth was ultimately deceiving me and ultimately leading me on the path to my own destruction. And it was when I called out to God and I asked to be shown the truth that strangely within, it wasn't this, instantaneous thing. I did, though, I will mention that, I did, though, instantaneously feel the peace and the comfort that I knew from my childhood, when I did call out to God in that way. But not immediately. Within, I would say, the next weeks to follow, things started crossing my path. I don't know if you're on YouTube right now watching this video, you might know what I'm talking about. YouTube has changed a lot over the years. But back when this happened, I think that this was 7 years ago now. Yeah, 7 years ago. No, a little bit less. 5 or 6 years, I would say. YouTube has since become, I feel like, a lot more, I don't know, commercial, I guess you could say. But in this time when I started to question truth and all that kind of thing, YouTube was different, and like how our like home feeds worked were a lot different. And at this point I was still watching my angel card readings and my tarot readings and my weird, Edgar Casey and Eckhart Tolle and Manly P. Hall and like all this weird stuff. That's what I was watching when I was on YouTube. And strangely, a video about just an explanation of what the gospel is, a short video about the explanation of the gospel, came onto my YouTube feed. And I hadn't been looking up anything like that before. And so I clicked on it, and it explained the gospel to me. We're going to talk about what the gospel is in a moment, but what that did for me at that very moment is it was like a veil was lifted, and it was like the deepest recognition of truth that I had ever experienced. Because, mind you, I had been in all these weird beliefs for so long, and I was used to that feeling, that intuition, that internal knowing of when something resonated with me in these weird beliefs. I knew what that felt like. But with this, it was completely different. With this, it was so absolute, and it was so like deep and palpable and life-changing. And I'll never forget it. And it was when it really made sense to me, and I had never thought about it this way before. So what is the gospel? The gospel to me is God's love letter to us. And you have to go back to the very, the beginning and the foundation of this. We're humans, okay? Like, we are flesh and blood. And we are inherently flawed. We make mistakes, we lie, we cheat, we steal, we break hearts, we hurt people. That is our nature as human beings. And that, in comparison to God, who is holy and pure. And if you're not used to the idea of God, like let's like break that down a little bit further. Like, you can't deny it, that there is something intelligent behind all of this. Us as humans, nature, there's something intelligent behind it. Like, you can't convince me that when you look at a nautilus shell, and when you look at how the formation and the shape of the galaxies, and then that's also the same formation of how our cell, like when we're formed in the womb, the very beginning cells and the pattern of how our cells are formed are in that same formation. You can't tell me that there's not something intelligent behind this. You can't tell me, with the way that we are as humans and our nature and our capacity to love, yeah, we have the capacity to hate and to destroy too, but we have, as sentient beings, we have this nature to be conscious and to love. You can't convince me that there's nothing behind this. And if you're a staunch atheist, we're all welcome to have our own beliefs, and I respect whatever any belief anybody else has. But this is how my mind works, and this is how logically things make sense to me, that there is a God. And also in my personal experience, which all of us have our own experiences, and my experience can't be your experience. But that experience that I had as a child of feeling the presence and the comfort and the peace of God is undeniable. Could that be a construct of my own mind? One could maybe think that, but for me, that personal experience that I've had is undeniable. So to me, there is a God. And I would try to recognize God as different things over my years and my different, spiritual searches. I've read many religious texts from around the world and studied different religions, just, trying to make a grasp on things over my years of searching. But all over the world, most acknowledge, I'm not going to generalize, most acknowledge the presence of something bigger than ourselves. And so that's what I perceive God, as is this loving, intelligent, creative, all-powerful, all-knowing. And so when we bring it back to what the gospel is, our humanness compared to God's perfection and God's holiness. And I'm going to mention too that I do believe that God is holy and that God is pure and that God is perfect, just in his nature. He is. So in that, we are separated from God. We are, in our humanness, in our flawedness, separated from God's holiness. So what can be done about that? That's where Jesus comes in. And Jesus comes in as the bridge between us and God. So back in the day, in religious practices, like way back in the day, there would be sacrifices made as a way to atone and purify ourselves to approach God. Like way back in the day, in the places that God would dwell, for man to approach God, there had to be the sacrifice as the atonement and the purification to be able to approach God, because in his holiness, it's so powerful that it would literally destroy us. So there were these things that were done to purify and atone before one could approach God. And so there were sacrifices made of animals. And Jesus comes into this as the ultimate sacrifice. That is the bridge, that is the atonement, that is the purification, ultimately, for all of us, for us to be able to be reconciled with God's holiness. And so I know some of these words that I may be saying and like what I may be talking about may just be like whatever, this is weird, but like let's let it unfold a little bit more. So like, and that's, when you start getting into the Trinity and like stuff like that, like God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, that starts getting a little like convoluted and wishy-washy for us. But the point of that is that, God, Jesus is God's son, and God gave his only son as the atonement for us. This is God's love for us. God loves us so much that he gave his only son as the atonement for our humanness, and that God loves us, and that he wants to be in relationship with us, and he wants, when we want to approach him, he wants us to be able to approach him. He doesn't want there to be this separation between us. And one of the most beautiful things about this to me is that, God is all knowing, and God knew about this before the earth was even here. God knew his love for us. God had this plan all along. And the beauty of God's love for us, and also his desire for us to know him and to be in relationship with him, is beyond words. And so that's where Jesus comes in, and Jesus is that bridge between us and God. And he is the ultimate sacrifice for anything that we've done. And then we move forward to the most incredible. It's all incredible, but I have experienced this in my own life, that after Jesus was sacrificed for us to be able to, be reconciled to God, Jesus rose again. And it is said that if you believe this, that we will be risen, we will rise again. Because in our humanness, we oftentimes find ourselves in places and times of life where we have died, like our soul has died, whether it be addictions, whether it be, lies that we've told ourselves, whether it be ways that we're living that are destructive, like, even when life is good, like, it's almost in our nature as humans to destroy ourselves. Even if it doesn't seem like it's like that's the thing, like, oh, life is great, I'm rich, I'm powerful, I have all these, women or men or whatever. We still in that can destroy ourselves. And even when things are good and we have everything and we're successful and we're rich and we're famous and we're powerful, it doesn't mean that we're fulfilled and we're happy, and that can destroy us. But in our nature, we can destroy ourselves, and it's like, and in that, it's like death. It's like our souls die. And what I experienced, finding myself in the depths of that kratom addiction, which I had never been in a physical addiction of that magnitude, I found that my soul had died. I found that my soul had died because of all of those beliefs that I was into, all those weird hippie new age beliefs where I was ultimately worshiping myself. I found that I was destroying myself and that my soul had died. And so in seeing this, in seeing not only God's love for me, his love without bounds, that he gave his only son as the atonement for the mistakes that I had done. And then, who Jesus was too. We haven't even talked about that. Jesus is so awesome. Like, maybe not to everybody, but dude, I am an old hippie, and to me, Jesus is like not the hippie, Grateful Dead, New Age. Jesus is like the OG hippie, where he is a rebel, he is an outlaw, he was not cool with the way that the times were that he lived in, and how people were go like organized religion. He was not down with the organized religion during that time. And Jesus was a mover and a shaker. And he would say when things weren't cool. But also, Jesus was the embodiment, is the embodiment of true love and true acceptance, and finding those who were down and out, the underdogs, and being with them and loving on them. And the principles that Jesus taught are a framework for how to live life and how to live it well and how to love others. And to me, that is rad. And so not only was Jesus this sacrifice, Jesus was this rad dude that loved and lived and was the embodiment of God, of God's love for us. And that resonates so much with me. It may not with you, but it resonates so much with me. So I didn't understand that though when the gospel started to first cross my path in that video. But what I did understand was that I was dead in my soul because of the addiction that I was in and because of the beliefs that I was in. And I wasn't just in this stuff for like a couple years. I was in this stuff for like 15 years, a good part of my life at that point. And so when I saw that aspect of that, like, when those who believe can rise again, it just hit. It hit in some sort of way that changed my life, basically. And I was still helplessly in this addiction. And for some reason, seeing that video about the gospel that shouldn't have even been on my feed at that point, seeing that video about the gospel, it just hit me. And I had cried out to God, asking for God to show me the truth. And it just hit me. And the biggest thing that hit me was God's love for me. And so I know that it's easy to like hear about like the gospel, and it's easy to think about churches and like all this kind of stuff. But like for me, like I experienced the gospel in my bedroom with the shades drawn and me not being able to function in my life because I was helplessly addicted to this stuff that I was on. And over the months and now years to follow, because I was 4 years kratom free a couple months ago, I have been raised from the dead and I have been recreated. And like I said, I didn't know about really who Jesus was, truly who he was at first, but I figured it out. And I learned about who he was and what his deal was and how he lived and how he loved. And it has completely changed my life. And I'm not a person who goes to church in a building. I'm not a person who subscribes to any organized religion. I don't consider myself a Christian because I believe that Christianity is a construct of organized religion. And that's cool. Like I'm not against anybody who calls themselves a Christian, but when I am asked about my beliefs, I say that I follow Jesus. And it was in the gospel and it was in the teachings of Jesus that I was raised from the dead and that I was made into who I am today. And it has helped me to live my life in a way that is right and just. Because I came from a really bad family situation and I didn't have parents who showed me right from wrong. I didn't have parents that showed me how to live and how to be. And I, through the teachings of Jesus, am given that framework and am given that structure and am given that difference between right and wrong. And it's made me who I am today. It's why I'm sober today. It's why I am able to treat people the way that I do. It's why I'm able to treat myself the way that I do. And I am so thankful. And I don't share my testimony and my story to try to change you or to try to, get you saved in any way. I share my story with you and my testimony with you because this is who I am and this is why I am the way that I am. And I'm respectful of what everybody believes. One of my best friends is a Muslim person from Pakistan. And just because I believe what I believe doesn't mean that I think that anybody else should believe it. And I want to get that straight. And I think that that's something with organized religion that I am not really down with, is that, I love everybody. And I see God reflected in those who, I see God reflected in my Muslim friend. Not God, I don't see God, it's not the same way that I did when I was in the pantheism stuff. So I want to get that straight. But I'm not here to push what I believe on you. I'm not here to say that you should believe this. I get it. Like, it's really hard to wrap your mind around, like, the whole idea of what the gospel is. And there's a lot of like stuff about it that seems really strange. But if we just loosen our grip on, that trying to make perfect sense of it. And like for me, what really made sense was the symbolism of it. The symbolism of God's love for us and the symbolism of us being dead in our nature and being, raised again, brought back to life by the understanding of God's life, of God's love for us. That's what made sense to me. And I'm not here to say that you should believe that. I'm just here to share what happened with me. Because the person that sits in front of you right now is not the person who I was when I was dead in those beliefs and in that addiction. So I thank you for listening to this. And this is something that I don't focus. The focus on this channel is not, there is a foundation of faith, and that will never change, but we don't focus on this as much. And I'm grateful that if you've clicked on this video and it's not something that you're into, that if you've made it this far, I'm grateful that you did, because this is something that is integral to who I am and why I am the way that I am and what this channel is all about. So I appreciate that. And if you have any questions or anything like that, you're welcome to leave them in the comments. And so thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye.